right, welcome in. This is episode 21 of the Individual Skills Hockey Podcast, and the first of season 2. We're lucky to be joined today with John O'Sullivan. He's the founder of the Changing the Game project. John, how you doing today? And thanks for joining us.
Miles, thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited. I've been excited by all the people I connected through like the coach's site, and so it's great to be on here.
Yeah, so for our listeners out there, I watched your presentation at the Coach's Site Live. For those that don't know, the Coach's Site is my favorite source for all things hockey knowledge, so definitely recommend them. And then after hearing you talk, I just wanted to talk to you and provide our little community in Plymouth, Minnesota, mostly all your knowledge about this stuff. So just tell us a little bit about your background in coaching and how your organization came to be and kind of the events that led up to you deciding you needed to do something like this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you saw me skate, you wouldn't take hockey specific advice from me. But I grew up multi-sport kid on Long Island in New York, playing everything. Also grew up in the 80s in the heyday of the New York Islanders. And so, actually like fell in love with hockey as a kid, but moved into my sport with soccer, and ended up playing collegiately and professionally for a bit, and then coaching collegiately. And luckily that coaching job was at the University of Vermont, where I got the first-hand seat to some of the best pickup hockey games in the world, with Olympians on the ice in Gutterson Arena, all coming back at the end of the NHL season and stuff like that. So that was super cool to do that. But then, so I was a college coach and a youth coach in the soccer realm. And about 12 years ago, I started this organization called Changing the Game Project, where we basically do coach education and parent education around making the youth sports environment better for our kids. It certainly changed a lot, since I was a kid, where I was able to dabble in lots of things and find the one that suited me best. And so I think that ship has sailed, but I still think there's a lot of things that we can do better in youth sports that give our kids more enjoyment and more autonomy and more ownership. So as a result of that, I've now written 4 books and have a podcast called Way of Champions, and then do a lot of speaking at coaching conventions and with different organizations, such as the Coach's Site, where we connected.
Awesome. And as you're going through your coaching journey, was there things that you started to see change in the landscape, or was there events that led you to realize that something like this is needed? Or was there, kind of that one moment where it's like, geez, we got to fix some things in our communities?
Yeah. There was a couple, and the sports ecosystem, it's rarely your local club that's making all the decisions, right? It's your local club that plays within a state association, that plays within certain leagues, that those leagues have seasons and requirements and things like that, that even if the people running your club disagree with them, that's where we play, or that's who we play against, and we have to manage that. So, in the soccer realm, I saw a lot of that as well, and had to sort of work through this challenging environment where, kids, like, I live in a place called Bend, Oregon, where our closest away game was 3 hours away. Right. And so there was so many overnight trips, and trying to create an environment where kids weren't getting burned out, weren't getting just overrun, trying to keep up with the Joneses, who maybe lived in bigger cities, who, could go play a game and go sleep in their own bed. And our kids couldn't do that. And at that same time, my own children were sort of 5 and 6 and moving into youth sports as well. So I was seeing this perspective as a dad. And really, when I started Changing the Game Project, my thing was helping parents, because I'd been coaching for a while, and I coached athletes who had gone on to play for national teams and in World Cups and play pro and NCAA Division I. And I'd also coach kids that just got burned out and beat up by the system. And so I wanted to kind of pass along the knowledge of like, hey, this is, if you do X, this is usually how it ends and why. But if you follow these sort of guidelines, that gives your child the best chance of playing the longest and being the most, having the best career, if you call it. And so, yeah, so there was a lot of things that came together that made me say, man, maybe I can do this a little bit differently and, create a better environment, at least in my own club that I was running.
Yeah, it's such a good point about existing in a larger structure, about the region or the state level. One example that ties into hockey I always talk about is our 10U players have a 35 game limit for Minnesota hockey, and then after that you can play 100 games if you wanted to. And so as far as keeping up with the Joneses, it's hard for our organization to tell coaches, you should probably keep it to 45 or 50 games for our 14-year-olds. But the next town over is playing 80 or 90. So it's, everything kind of ties in together. So
think about that, right? Like just there to play 90 games, right? That's, I mean, obviously there's some where there's multiple in a day, which has its own series of things that are not good for developing a hockey player. But, and so then how often are you getting to practice? Right. And so if you're practicing twice a week, which, again, for player development, you probably want to practice 3 or 4 times for every time you play.
right.
But, in the US, we have this race to play the most games because that's where the parents get entertained. But it doesn't produce the best hockey players or baseball players or soccer players. It just produces, tired kids.
Right. So when you do this type of work or you speak to groups, do you find that it's something that they're searching, or is it kind of met with resistance? Obviously, when they book a speaker or whatever, the leaders of that organization find value in it. But as far as like the parents and coaching groups, are you met with resistance? Let's say, are they hungry for this type of education?
I mean, it runs the gamut, right? I've never sat in a coach education thing where there's not a coach sitting there like, why do I have to be here right now? And I get a lot of people who are super, excited and enthusiastic. Same thing with parents. The biggest challenge, especially in parent engagement and parent education, is that unless your organization makes it mandatory that they do something, the people who need it most will never attend. Right. So any club director or any coach, if I went up to them and said, name your 2, parents that cause you the most issues, they'll do that in the snap of a finger. But if you do a voluntary parent education night, those people are not coming.
Right.
Unless you force them to be there. Right. Now you can force them to be there and they're miserable and they might think it's a complete waste of time. But every once in a while you reach one of them and they go, holy crap, like that's me in the front seat of the car berating my kid on the drive home because they lost a 9-year-old hockey game, right? Or stuff like that. So I don't think there's systemic change happening in sport anytime soon, but I do think families can change 100%. Teams can change 100%, and even clubs can change 100%, trying to work within that ecosystem of providing a better experience for kids.
Yeah, 100%. And just generally, you mentioned burnout is something we're trying to avoid, obviously, for kids. But like, just generally, in your opinion, like, why do we care about this stuff? Like, what value does youth sports bring to kids, from your perspective?
It's funny you asked that question now because I just before we got on sent a text to a friend who is a senior level coach and coach educator, who was just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and just went through this really 12-hour surgery and everything like that. And the coach's response to me when I heard and reached out was, this is why I put my kids in sports. This is why I go and teach and try to create an environment where more people will stay in sports, because um, this is why sports matter. Not for your wins when you're 13 or 14, or the tiny percentage of people turning pro, but that you learn how to do hard things, right? And you learn how to, when you get punched in the face, to get back up and learn from it and whatever. And I just thought that was a really powerful thing. And so if as a parent and as a coach, we take this broad view of what is the role of purpose of sports, which is not to win the Minnesota, under 9 holiday tournament,
Yep.
right? But it's to develop people and give them skills that they're going to use off the ice or off the field. And you take that higher purpose into your coaching and into your human development, right? And you coach a person and not a sport. That's when it really matters. And it's just, you always get these like little reminders, like I got this morning, of this is why we do the work that we do. And it's not to win this game or whatever. It's so much bigger than that.
Right. All right, let's get into some coaching stuff. Or as far as educating coaches, one of my favorite parts of your presentation at TCS Live was when you asked the coaches in the room to write down one quality of one of their favorite coaches on a Post-it note, and then you had the coaches put on one wall things like caring, passionate, empathetic, and then on the other wall it was all hockey knowledge type stuff. And what you found was, I think it was like 2/3 of the respondents were on those softer skills. So I guess, knowing that, why do you think coaches are so quicker, I think, to enhance their hockey knowledge, when clearly the most impactful coaches are on the other side of the wall?
Yeah, yeah. So again, you described it pretty well. What I did ask is your 5 favorite qualities,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And what it usually turns out is about 80-20, 90-10, that the qualities go on the wall that we would label connection or relationships or emotional intelligence, and 10 to 20% go under hockey skills, right? Or knowledge of the sport. And this is a pretty consistent thing across all the sports I've worked in, from soccer to rugby to golf to Aussie rules football, right? And usually the higher the level that the coaches in the room played at, the more it trends towards connection. Because there's no coach in the NHL who doesn't know enough about hockey,
Right.
right? And so, and no coach gets fired because they can't teach hockey. It's they get fired because they can't build team and they can't communicate. And they can't connect with their athletes. And so I think, there's this quote that says, we tend to value the things that we can measure, because it's hard to measure the things we value. And so it's easy to measure your book of practice activities. And it's easy to do coach education and then test your coaches on the knowledge of, oh, well, what practice can you run? And can you run a forechecking practice and neutral zone defending and whatever? You can measure that. How do you measure love, right? How do you measure connection in a coaching course? You can't. And so we tend to ignore those things, even though coaches say they're most important. And so this is where I think coaches have to really go out of their way to educate themselves in this area. And then, this was why I was excited to be asked to do the coaches site. And also then, they have one of my courses on their website now and stuff like that, is basically, just because they get it, right? That we have to go deeper into this. And so the best coaches in the world that I've gotten to interview and talk to and everything like that, this is what they focus on, right? They have the sports knowledge. You get laughed out of the locker room if you don't have the knowledge, but it's about the connection and the relationships that win at the highest level. And even in, might and the youngest kids, right? A lot of people won't coach because they think they don't know enough about hockey. But if you understand kids, You understand that, if I give them ownership and enjoyment and develop intrinsic motivation, they'll come back next year. A lot of people have those skills. And you, as a coaching director, I can give you the activity to run, right? And the activity will teach the hockey piece. And maybe, yeah, I might teach a little more nuance than you are capable of. But that nuance doesn't really matter at a 7-year-old, right? What matters is, man, do I love this and I want to come back tomorrow?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people hear what your answer there, and they sometimes have a misconception of it's all sunshine and rainbows on that side of the wall. But I just wanted to talk about, like, one of my favorite coach of all time in hockey was, I would say, the most demanding coach I've ever had.
Yeah.
And so how do coaches build those connection skills, but also give the players what they want, which is structure and holding them accountable so they can get better, really.
Yeah, 100%. And so this idea of being demanding is not, like, it's very easy again to default and go, oh, that's just soft, whatever. No, demanding is something that kids want. Demeaning, no one wants,
Yeah.
right? We don't mind a boss at work who holds us accountable to a high standard that we have agreed and signed up to be held to. We don't like the boss who attacks our person and our character and our appearance or whatever it is. That doesn't inspire us to work harder for that person. It makes us go, God, I got to get another job. Right. So why, as coaches, would we think that making someone feel worse would make them do better? It doesn't. Right. What we want to do is say, hey, this is the standard. This is what you signed up for. I see the ability in you, Miles, to achieve this. All right. I'm telling you, I'm giving you this feedback because I believe you can do this. Go do it. That's the person who makes you want to play. So this is not soft at all. Love is not soft in coaching. Love is actually, that's the highest level of demand. Because I love you, I'm demanding more than you're willing to give right now. And as coaches, we know, like, we have players who they've never been loved. They've never got a hug and they need a hug from us. And we have people who've never gotten discipline. And so they need discipline from us. And our job as a coach is to see what everyone needs within the team environment and be able to try to deliver that as closely as possible.
Well, and from what I see, I think the communication part is really hard for a lot of coaches, and they haven't developed those skills because it's hard to tell players, they're not good enough at something right now, and they need to get,
Mhm.
like, the honesty of that is hard. And so what
Mhm.
happens a lot, I think, is it doesn't get communicated, and then um, why they're not getting an opportunity, probably at the higher levels, that creates resentment, and then you go down a bad path. So just
Yeah.
talk about, like, I guess, the communication of piece with that too.
Well, I like that you use the word skills. And, if people are watching this, right, on your hat right now, it says skills clinics, right? Individual skills clinics. It's like that whole wall of relationships, those are skills, right? Communication is not something that you have or you don't have, right? It's something that can be developed. And, for some coaches, yes, it might come more naturally than others, but it's still something that can be developed. So just like we, expect our athletes to develop their skills, why wouldn't we as coaches be consistently developing ours? And so that communication piece and that honesty piece is so important. We had this interview with a 22-time national champion college coach month ago or so. And he said the three keys to his program were number one, creating a competitive environment every single day. Number two, the core values of their program. And number three, helping every athlete's personal narrative be more aligned with the truth or more aligned with reality. And I think that third one is one of the most important things that we do as a coach, right?
Yeah.
And so that comes from telling the truth, right? You have to tell the truth. Now, you don't have to tell the truth by demeaning someone. You tell the truth by being honest. Because if you're not honest, if you have a player comes to you and says, "Why am I on the third line?" and you don't tell them and give them objective things to get better so that they can move up, then you're not coaching. You're not doing them a favor, right? So it's being able to be honest in a way that inspires them to work on the things they need to work on. That's coaching. That's taking a player from one place to another that they wouldn't get to on their own without that honest feedback. And some kids don't like it because they don't get honest feedback at home, right? So they, fail a class in high school and mom or dad goes in and tries to get the teacher fired and says, "You failed my kid." No, I didn't fail your kid, right? Your kid didn't hand in homework, didn't study for tests, didn't make an attempt to learn anything or participate in class. How did I fail them? They failed themselves. And when I was growing up, my dad would have been like, "What are you complaining about?" But I think now parents are so scared that that bad grade is on the permanent record, that you don't get into this right college or whatever, or you don't make they make the B team and they don't want to honestly assess, well, why is my kid on the B team? And so as a coach, you have to have those hard conversations, and sometimes you have to agree to disagree. And then there's, we have this whole ecosystem of coaches who, private skills coaching, which in and of itself is not a bad thing at all, right? It's a good thing. But if that coach isn't honest and the parents going, "Well, our private skills coach says we're this." Yeah, but your private skills coach isn't at practice every day watching your kid go through the motions or fooling around or disrupting. That's why you're not playing, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this ecosystem where there's a lot of people who are very good maybe at what they do, but are not being honest with players of what level they really at, because they're making $100 an hour off that kid and they don't want to lose the client. That's not a good thing either.
Right. And another big one that's becoming more prevalent in our Minnesota hockey, high school hockey, is advisors. Is another role that's telling players maybe some things that aren't aligned with reality or what the coaches see in them. So,
I mean, I see. I didn't know that, but that's fascinating, right?
yeah,
And so, like, coaches at the major junior level or whatever, like, they're not in the game of ignoring really good players, right? The
yeah,
only reason a really good player gets ignored, right, if they have the skill to play that level or go NCAA or whatever it is because the player has lousy character, right? Or the parents are a nightmare,
right,
right? That's why they would ignore them. If you're good enough, someone will find you unless there's red flags.
right. So you mentioned your dad. This kind of ties into, you hear it all the time. It's like players now are soft. Players need to be coached differently this day compared to when I was playing. Um, is there any truth to that? Do you think? And if there is there a better way to frame that statement that I hear all the time in a more positive and constructive way?
Kids are different, right? Just like we were different from our parents, right? You can't grow up in a different time with technology and things like that. So what is today's kid? How are they different, right? Shorter attention span. We know this. Many of them, they have immediate gratification because all the answers are held in, you know, a device on their hand that was more powerful than the world's greatest supercomputer 25 years ago, 20 years ago. Um, Kids feel anxiety when they're away from that device. Kids aren't used to having difficult conversations in person because it's very easy to text or Snapchat someone. I've watched kids on my team van like start dating and break up in the same van trip, right? it's like so yes, kids are different. Um, but because of that, it doesn't, they're not all softer. They just need something there. And there's certainly coaches out there who are reaching them, right? So if you're not reaching them and someone else is, the problem isn't necessarily with the kids you're coaching. It's with you going, man, I have to change my approach, that what worked in the past maybe didn't. Now, this doesn't mean you drop your standards, right? It doesn't mean you say, no, we're not going to work hard at practice, or we're not going to treat each other well, or we're not going to X, Y, and Z. You don't drop your standards, but what you do is you just say, okay, well, whatever I'm doing now isn't reaching these kids. So how can I shift? And I watched, like, we have this amazing basketball coach, Tara Vanderveer, on the podcast, right? She won national championships at Stanford, NCAA basketball, 23 years apart. Now, those kids are really different, and yet she's
Yeah.
winning national championships 23 years apart. So something changed in her while things changed in those kids. So, blaming the kids is just that's just an excuse. And yeah, you might have kids who aren't as gritty as you were, or not don't face adversity as well as you do. But welcome to coaching. Like, that's your job. Teach them.
Yeah. I mean, that's my take on it. Whenever I hear that, it's like, well, you signed up to be a coach. It's your job to figure out and not just throw it away as, these kids are soft these days. It's like, well, even if that's true, it's your job to figure out how to make it work for them, right?
Yeah, I remember one of my coaching mentors once said to me, and it's always stuck with me. He's like, "It's not your fault how they arrive on your team. It's your responsibility how they leave." Right? And that's
Right.
always, like, stuck with me, is that when that kid comes in and whatever is not working for them, you didn't create that, right? But you picked them, and so it's your responsibility for how they leave, and maybe that's character development and things like that. I remember I had a kid when I lived in Michigan. I had a kid I coached, um, and I love this kid, and he was a great player, but man, he just would always get distracted and be, you know, mouthing off to referees and stuff like that. And his dad was an auto worker and worked, like, the shift, and so rarely ever came to his games. And I told the kid, I was like, listen, from now on, if anything you chirp at a referee, you're out. You're sitting the rest of the game. And I remember, like, one of the 2 games a year that his dad was able to attend, he just chirped away, and I just took him out, and he sits down on the bench and he's like, "Coach, please put me back in. My dad's here. He never gets to watch me play." And I was like, "Sorry, man. Like, I'm going to change this, like, maybe today's the day it finally sticks." Right? And, like, 10 years after that, he was moving out west, and he drove all the way to Oregon before moving to Southern California to spend a day or two with me. And he went on and was a Division I soccer player, and he was like, I just want to say thanks, man. Like, that lesson stuck. Like, that was the day it finally stuck. And he goes, it was not a pleasant car ride home with my dad, who was like, I took a day off, and you get benched. And thankfully his dad was also like, and your coach is right.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are the things. Like, that to me is, that trip that he took is a far greater paycheck than anything I ever got for coaching a team.
Right. That's an awesome story. So speaking of parents, just generally, what's your advice, or how do you train coaches on handling the parent relationship with their youth teams?
Um, First of all, again, like, I think parents are they're your allies. They're not your adversaries, right? They love their kids. I understood this better once I became a parent as well, right? That this child is the most important thing in my life, right? So trust, like, anyone who's become a parent can remember the day they first got a babysitter so that you and your spouse could go out and have a 2-hour dinner and just get away from a bit. And it's like the first time, unless you had, like, grandma or grandpa who lived in town, like, the first babysitter, like, how could I possibly trust this person? Do you have a
Yeah.
medical degree or whatever? And so you start to understand trust and what trust is. So when you understand that that's where parents are coming from, and then they're raising kids in this environment of fear, that my fear of missing out, fear that I haven't done enough, this environment of comparison where I can compare my kid to every other kid academically and athletically. um, I think for the most part parents are just scared, and so you have to fill the void with good information, right? You have to fill the void with knowledge of, hey, this is what's happening, and this is okay, and this is not, a devastating, like, this is part of the process. um I think as a coach, you should 100% set sort of standards and expectations on communication. So this is when it's okay to talk. Don't wait for me outside the locker room after the game. That is
Yeah.
never okay. I will not speak to you then. um these are the things that we can speak about: your child's performance, your child's attitude and practice, what you're seeing at home, and the things that may be influencing what's happening on the ice. um the all appropriate, right? The formation, position, practice, that's coaching thing. You want to coach, come coach, right? Come volunteer to coach. But other than that, like, that's not a discussion that we're going to have. Other people's kids, not a discussion we're going to have, unless it's something around, like, you know this kid's bullying my kid, or this is what's happening in the locker room. That's okay, right?
Right.
So yeah, you set those things, and then I think for the most part, you know parents, like, they jump on board, and then be really intentional about seeing someone's kid and what they're doing. So when you reach out, like, what I would do as a coach is, if a kid had a really good game or something, right? I'd send an email to the parent, and it would say, for Miles, and I'd say, Miles, just wanted to compliment you on a great game today. I've seen the effort you're putting into practice. I've seen what you're doing. I know you've been working on your shot or working on your skating, and it's really starting to show. Keep up the great work, my man. Right? Or, Miles, I know it wasn't your day, and that mistake you made at the end could be devastating, but you did a lot of good stuff, and you're getting better. By sending that to the parent, I say, I see your kid, right? Because your kid gets 1/16th of my attention and gets 16/16ths of your attention. So you're going to see things that I don't. But when I do see them, I want the parents to know that I do see this and I care. You know what? I saw how devastated you were after the game, just like you did, mom and dad, in the car ride home. So I saw that.
I think
I acknowledge it.
that's such a good tip because I think a lot of parents judge how much coaching their kid is getting
Mhm.
based on visual cues of literally watching them on the bench talk to the different kids when
Right.
that's I mean, you can't tell what's going on throughout a game and how much coaching they're actually getting or whatever. So sending something like that is a fantastic idea of, proving that you do care about their kid.
Yeah.
So I'm 31 years old, so I'm starting to have some friends that are starting to have kids, obviously, and get into, the first stages of hockey. And I tell them about my job, and we have great parents in our community for the most part, but I do tell them some stories of some stuff that happens, and their response is always, I'm not going to be like that. I'm gonna be, super chill guy, super chill mom about all of this stuff because, I know what you're going through. So I don't want that to happen. And I always tell them, well, just let's see if that's true. So
Mhm.
how do you think, or what advice would you give to parents of if they're coming in with that mindset, how did they, I guess, remember um, their mindset back then when situations do arise?
Yeah. So first of all, like, there's some science behind this, and there's this thing called mirror processing, right? And so mirror processing is, if I walk down the street and walk in front of people and I yawn, and they see me, they might yawn, right? That's mirror processing. We tend to mimic the actions of the person there. If I sit here like this the whole time, you're more likely to do this, right? That's mirror processing. That's how we communicate. And so one of the fascinating things about mirror processing genes is that when our kids play, and something happens to them, we process it like it's happening to us. Right. So this is the interesting science. Or as a coach, right? If you go and you're watching in the rink the game before you and the officials are a nightmare, you're not up on the glass, banging on the glass, going whatever, because you're not invested in that match. Right. But if your kid was playing, or as soon as your game starts, you're invested as well. And so I think as a parent, like if you teach them that, first of all, like, and I've written chapters and books about this, like understand that biologically you're reacting in a certain way where certain things happen to your kids. So you can say whatever you want, but as soon as your kid gets kicked in soccer or checked into the boards and you think it's a dirty shot, that's just like someone uh you know hit you with a dirty shot. You're not going to be like, hey man, it's okay. You're going to be fired up, right?
Yeah.
So I think just recognizing that, um and then understand, like being really self-aware as a parent of, if I can't sit on the sideline and not coach every play and not tell my kid to shoot it, to pass it, to do this, to do that, if I can't sit there and not yell at the officials every time I think they make a bad call, then I shouldn't sit there. I should go way far away. The farther you remove yourself from the ice or the field, the less likely you are to yell and scream like a lunatic, right? So if you can't help it, be self-aware enough to move away, right? And just let go, right? Like one of the worst things, when a parent says to me, we struck out 10 batters today, or
Yeah.
we scored 3 goals. No, we didn't. Right? We did not. And if you are saying we, that means you are living vicariously through your kid. And you need to cut that tie. You need to release them to the sport and let it be their journey.
Right. Speaking of that, we have a lot of parents in our community, obviously Minnesota, that played at a really high level, and all they want for their kids is to experience what they experienced, and it comes from a good place. I understand that, like they want them just to have a good time with it and love hockey as much as they did in order to get to that level. I guess my question is can parents foster that in your view of a love for the game, or is it entirely up to the kid how much work they want to put into it?
I mean, I think it's probably somewhere a combination. But you can't make your kid love something. And sometimes, like early on, less is more, right? When you overload a kid who says, I just love hockey, and you overload them early on, like who cares how good they're at 12 if they quit when they're 16, right? Versus like backing away a bit and like, no, you know what? We're going to take a little time off here and play some baseball or whatever, right? Where we played those 40 games, we're not going to play 40 more. We're going to do this so that come next fall, you're super excited to play hockey. And even if you fall behind a little bit, your motivation to play, you tend to catch back up, right? When you're hungry, and you can put in those hours later on. So I think you know neither of my kids love soccer as much as I did, right? They didn't go, I would go to the basement every day and had a kickback wall, and I would just hit a ball against the wall for an hour working on my touch. I would get up before school and run. My kids liked it. They were pretty good high school players, but they never loved it enough that they were going to ever be, you know, an NCAA Division One player, which is totally fine because, like, you know, my kid can kill me on a mountain bike. He loves that. He loves snowboarding. He loves to go to the gym and lift weights. Like that's the stuff that I never once am like, come on, get out of bed and go to the gym. When he couldn't drive, it was like, Dad, come on, get out of bed and take me to the gym. Right.
Right.
And so that's intrinsic motivation. And what you're trying to do as a parent is foster intrinsic motivation. Now, I think some kids are born far more driven and gritty than others, right? And if you have kids and they're driven in different ways. If you were really, 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 really driven as an athlete, it doesn't mean that your kids are going to be. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad kid because they're not as driven as you. You got to hope that they find that inside of themselves. And so that starts with, well, love the game, right? And what I see is a lot of parents who have kids who love the game and have some drive and are in an environment where they're thriving, and the parents yank them out of that environment to go to the bigger club, right? And they take them away from their friends and this great coach, and they put them in this thing because this team wins more. And a year later or 2 years later, that kid is beat down, doesn't love hockey, doesn't even want to play anymore because the parent was in such a hurry to get him to the next thing because, well, that's better, but what's better, right? So sometimes it's just being patient in this environment where they're still growing as an athlete and as a human being, and they love it and their friends are there, and then, and jump later on.
Yeah.
But so many people jump when kids are really, really young, and those are the kids who, in my experience, tend to quit.
Yeah. I remember I was listening to Padraig Harrington, the golfer,
Golfer.
talk about his relationship with his son, taking him out to the golf course and stuff. And he said something like, I would always take him home from the range before he was tired,
Yep.
and we would always go get a Coke and an ice cream after every single time. And it's like, yeah, when they're dead tired, they have a negative, kind of feeling towards it. And I'm thinking of like pond hockey, take them home when they're, screaming at you to stay so that they want to come back next time. So,
And I would say even pond hockey, because that's kids playing and driven by them, is less than like, the analogy would be, don't sign them up for the extra skating clinic, or, give them that month off in the summer or whatever it is, right? Like, yes, you can always do more, but sometimes less is better. And, yeah, I mean, like, again, I live 30 minutes from a big ski mountain, and great advice I got for my kids early on. And I love skiing. It's my favorite sport, right? My parents never skied. My brother and sister never skied. This was always something that was my passion. And they all, people said to me when my kids were young, never do one more. Right?
yeah,
Leave and make them go, oh, but that's it. No, like, leave so that next week they want to come back. Because one more run when your kid's on skis and they're 5 usually ends up with you carrying them down the hill, and then they don't want to come back the next
right.
week.
All right. That's awesome. One more question, because I think it's really, really important. And I thought the section on it that you talked about in your TCS Live was great. Just talk about the ride home and how important it is, how it can impact kids, and what the conversation should ideally be.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I think that really sticks with people from the TED Talk I did or whatever. There's some good research around this, that when we don't take into account our child's emotional state, and then we turn the ride home from a game into a prison, right? We got them locked in the car and we're stuck in traffic, and we're going to make this a teachable moment. And when they ask kids, when they interview kids, what's your worst memory of sport? The ride home is really high on the list, if not the top, because of all those things. And so recognizing that it's not necessarily a teachable moment, recognizing that every child is different. So my 2 kids, when we get in the car after a game, my daughter would always ask me, Dad, how do you think I did? She would bring it up. I would always try to, like, consistently say, well, what do you think went well today? What do you think needs work? What do you think you can focus on and practice this week to get better next weekend? Right? Really consistent. Best game, worst game, same 3 questions. Right? My son never asks me in the car, Dad, how do you think I did? Right? He's like, where's the food? Like, how quickly can we eat? Right? But him and I had an agreement, like, when's a good time to talk about this? And it would be like that night. The emotion's gone, the physical tiredness, your own emotion as a parent's gone, and you're like, okay, now we can have this decent conversation around this, where maybe you're willing to learn. So sometimes it's that night, sometimes it's the next morning. Sometimes I would, upset it. One of my kids for what I thought was a perceived lack of effort or competitiveness. And they would ask me, and I'd be like, you know what? It's probably just, it's not a great time to talk about it right now. But if I ever said that, they already knew they played poorly. Like, how often do your kids get in the car and they don't know they didn't do well, right? And
Yeah.
I think as a coach, this is your post-game talk as well. What are you really going to say? Or is what is coming out of your mouth now about their effort or lack of competitive or whatever, is that actually making them better, or is that just making you feel better? That you're getting your frustration out, versus let's talk about it before the next practice or in the hotel that night, when actually we can all agree that, yeah, it wasn't good enough. How can we make it better? And so I think if people just make the ride home a place that belongs to their kids, and if they bring it up, have a conversation. When they put it to bed, put it to bed. And if they don't bring it up, then don't even mention it. Just go get them food. I think it just makes a huge difference for people.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. I know people are going to get a lot out of it. If they want to find you, you want to let them know how they can kind of find your website and all that stuff?
Yeah. Changingthegameproject.com would be the mothership of all our blog posts, and the podcast called Way of Champions. It's on Spotify and Apple and all the platforms, and you can find the links to that. It's also on YouTube. You can find the links to that on the website as well. All the books are on Amazon. I mean, for parents, Champion Sports Parent that Jerry and I just did, and the Champion Teammate for how to be a great teammate. And then my other book for coaches called Every Moment Matters, about coaching. And you can find all those, again, on Amazon or whatever. I don't really like social media. I have put my 19-year-old daughter in charge of my Instagram page. She's not doing a lot with it, but more than me. But that's just at CTG Project HQ. And if someone's a coach and wants to connect, LinkedIn is actually the best. Just look for Coach John O'Sullivan on there. That's where I find the most reasonable people.
All right. This has been fantastic. This is John O'Sullivan with Changing the Game Project. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man.